She never called on him, not once. But the day she tried to humiliate him in front of the whole class, everything changed. She thought he'd choke, thought he'd prove her right. But he didn't even flinch. He sat at that piano and played like he owned the room. The music silenced every whisper, every doubt. When the last note faded, no one said a word. Not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. Because sometimes talent doesn't ask for permission. It demands respect. The soft shimmer of neon lights flickered against the dusky skies. As Terrence pulled his dusty pickup truck into the lot outside Elliot's taproom, a humble little bar just off Highway 74 in North Carolina. It wasn't anything upscale, just a go-to for locals, truckers, and tired travelers in search of a cold drink and a bit of peace. Terrence had only been back from deployment for a week, and all he wanted was a quiet moment to unwind before diving back into the grind of civilian life. He pushed open the squeaky door and stepped inside, welcomed by a wave of conversation and the low hum of an old jukebox playing a Johnny Cash tune. His eyes swept across the room, taking in familiar faces, a couple of regulars playing pool, a laughing group at the bar, and a few loners nursing beers in solitude. He wasn't there to socialize, just to breathe. Choosing a table tucked into a corner at the back, he positioned himself with a full view of the room. His camo uniform blended into the bar's dim lighting, the only standout being his worn sneakers, chosen for comfort, not looks. Terrence ordered a glass of water and sat quietly, his mind drifting to the family he'd soon reunite with. His mom's home cooking, his niece's excited chatter. That's all that filled his thoughts. Suddenly, the door burst open, jarring him from his reverie. 6 men strode in, the heavy stomp of their boots echoing on the wooden floor. They were older, clad in leather jackets adorned with patches that made it clear they were veterans. Loud and boisterous, they laughed and patted each other on the back on their way to the bar. Terrence gave them a quick glance, then turned back to his drink. But one man didn't just glance back. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard and sharp eyes, stopped mid-laugh when he saw Terrence. He mumbled something to his group, and they all turned. The laughter faded, replaced by a tension that slowly spread through the bar. Terrence could feel their stares, but chose not to react. He'd seen that kind of look before, the one that measured you, judged you without knowing the full picture. He took another sip, trying to focus on the jukebox rather than the growing tension creeping into the atmosphere. At the bar, the group leaned in, voices hushed but unmistakably directed at him. The leader whispered, and another chuckled, casting a pointed glance his way. Terrence stayed composed, relaxed on the outside but fully aware. Years of military discipline had trained him to stay cool under pressure. But that didn't mean he didn't notice their scrutiny. The evening, which started as a quiet break, was about to veer into unexpected territory. The jukebox's music faded into the background, drowned out by the deliberate stomps of boots approaching. The group was heading toward Terrence's table, led by the same bearded man, his eyes locked onto Terrence with a predator's focus. Terrence sensed a shift in the room before they even arrived. The bartender froze mid-pour, and the regulars watched with wary eyes. Terrence gently set down his glass and leaned back, calm on the surface, but every muscle on alert. "Hey," the leader barked, stopping just short of the table. His voice was rough, carrying a sharp bite of disrespect. "Nice uniform. Where'd you snag it? A Halloween shop." The men behind him laughed, the sound thick with sarcasm. Terrence met his eyes, unbothered. "It's mine," he answered calmly. "Earned it." The leader lifted a brow as if surprised. "Earned it, huh? That's funny. I've seen plenty of real soldiers, and none of them wear sneakers with their camo. You out here looking for sympathy? Or maybe a free drink?" Terrence's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed even. "I'm not here for pity or handouts. Just having a quiet night." The leader's smirk grew as he leaned in, his breath laced with stale beer. "You don't look like any soldier I've ever seen," he jeered. "Where are your boots? Your tags? Bet you don't even know how to salute." One of the others chimed in. "He probably doesn't even know what basic training is." Another added, "Dude's never seen a combat zone in his life." Laughter erupted again, grating against the jukebox's hum. Terrence remained silent, eyes moving calmly between them. He wasn't scared, just calculating. Years in the military had taught him to choose his moments. But the disrespect cut deep. It wasn't just the insults, it was the arrogance. "I don't owe you an explanation," Terrence said. At last, his tone steady but firm. The leader, now visibly irritated, stepped closer. His bulk cast a shadow over the table. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he sneered. "Walking in here like you belong? You don't." The entire room seemed to hold still. Terrence didn't flinch. "I served 3 tours overseas," he said evenly. "I don't need your permission to belong anywhere." The laughter ceased. The leader faltered, just slightly. But pride wouldn't let him walk away. "Yeah? Prove it. Show us your tags. Otherwise, you're just a fraud." Terrence scanned the group. Some of them looked unsure now. But no one dared question their leader. He exhaled slowly. "I don't need to prove anything to you. But if you think this is the time or place to start something, you might want to reconsider." Tension coiled in the air. The bartender's hand hovered over the phone. Patrons sat stiffly, their eyes flicking between the confrontation. Still, the leader didn't back down. His smirk returned, darker, more venomous. "Smart mouth you've got," he growled. "Let's see if it's as fast as your fists." For a second, everything stood still, like a wire stretched too tight. Then the man lunged, reaching for Terrence's collar. But Terrence didn't hesitate. His training took over. In one smooth move, he dodged, caught the man's wrist mid-air, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him face first against the table. The man let out a yelp, his tough guy act collapsing in an instant. Gasps filled the bar. The other men froze, wide-eyed, watching their leader pinned down. Terrence spoke quietly, his voice firm but in control. "I told you to think twice." He leaned closer, still holding the man in place. "You have no idea who you're messing with." The leader struggled, but Terrence's grip was unshakable, calm, efficient, unyielding. One biker took a cautious step forward, hands lifted halfway. "Come on, man, let him go." He didn't mean anything by it. Terrence's gaze locked onto him. "He came at me. You saw it. If you want him up, tell him to cool off." The bartender, who'd been silent till now, finally spoke. "Maybe it's best you all leave before this turns into something worse." But the leader, someone had called him Hank, wasn't done. Even pinned, he growled through gritted teeth, "Call the cops. He assaulted me. That uniform's fake. Arrest him." Terrence let him go with a controlled shove. Hank stumbled, rubbing his arm, glaring with pure hatred. "You'll regret this," he snarled. And just like that, his crew rallied behind him, fired up by their bruised pride. One of the men fumbled with his phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "Yeah, we've got someone here pretending to be a soldier," he said loudly enough for everyone in the bar to hear. "And he just attacked my friend." Terrence stood motionless, his face calm though his mind was racing. He understood how this might appear, how quickly situations like this could spiral, but he also knew he'd done nothing wrong. His service, his sacrifices, everything he had endured stood firm against their baseless accusations. All he needed to do now was stay composed. The bar buzzed with whispers as patrons leaned toward one another, stealing glances at Terrence. Some looked uneasy, unsure, while others were clearly impressed by how confidently he had handled the confrontation. Still, no one stepped in to offer support or challenge what had happened. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, piercing the tense air. Red and blue lights flashed against the windows, casting fractured shadows across the walls. The police had arrived. The bar's door swung open and 2 officers walked in. One was a stocky man with a tight haircut and mirrored shades that masked his expression. The other was a woman, sharp-eyed and composed, who surveyed the room carefully. The atmosphere fell silent as all eyes turned toward them. "We received a call about a disturbance," the male officer said, his voice steady. "Can someone tell us what happened?" Hank, still rubbing his wrist and red with frustration, was the first to speak. He jabbed a finger at Terrence. "That guy assaulted me, and he's impersonating a soldier. Just look at him. He doesn't even have proper boots." The officer turned to Terrence, who remained calm and alert, standing near his table. "Is that true?" the officer asked, his tone neutral. Terrence slowly shook his head and looked him in the eye. "No, sir. They came at me because they didn't believe I was actually in the military. When he grabbed me, I defended myself. That's all. The female officer stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the bar. Did anyone see what happened? She asked with quiet authority. The bartender broke the silence. I saw it. Hank was the one who got physical first. That man over there just reacted. He didn't start anything. A few murmurs followed. Yeah, said someone near the jukebox. That guy didn't throw the first punch. Hank's been acting up since the moment he walked. In! The male officer turned back to Terrence. Do you have any proof of your military service? Terrence nodded, moving slowly and deliberately. He pointed to a duffel bag on the floor beside him. My uniform is in there, with my name and rank. I also have my ID and wallet. You're welcome to check them. The officer picked up the bag, unzipped it, and carefully pulled out the neatly folded uniform, decorated with military badges and insignia. After inspecting it briefly, he looked to his partner, who gave a confirming nod. You're good, the male officer said respectfully. Thanks for your cooperation. Hank, still visibly fuming, barked out. You're just going to believe him? That stuff could be fake. The female officer shot him a sharp glare. That's enough. From everything I've heard, you're the one who escalated this. You're lucky he's not pressing charges. Hank, visibly deflated, the sting of the officer's words hitting hard. His crew shifted awkwardly, suddenly avoiding everyone's gaze. Here's how this is going to go, the male officer continued. We're filing a report. If you want to press charges, that's your right. But you should know, false accusations carry consequences. Hank opened his mouth, then shut it. He knew he'd lost. The officers gave the room one last look before the female officer turned back to Terrence. Thank you for staying calm. We'll make sure this incident is properly documented. Terrence gave her a nod. Thank you, officer. The bikers shuffled out, their cocky attitude now replaced with silence and embarrassment. Hank cast one last angry glare at Terrence before disappearing through the door. The officers followed, leaving the bar in a hushed return to normal. Terrence sat back down, his drink still untouched. The weight of the incident lingered, but he was grateful it hadn't escalated further. Around him, patrons now regarded him differently, with a quiet respect. A few days later, Terrence was under the hood of his old pickup truck in the driveway of his modest home on the edge of Fayetteville, North Carolina. The late-day sun cast golden light across the yard as he tightened a bolt. Though the confrontation was behind him, it stayed in his mind, not because it had been dangerous, but because of what it represented. It wasn't the first time he'd been unfairly judged, and likely wouldn't be the last. The sound of tires crunching gravel broke his thoughts. He straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. A motorcycle had just pulled into the driveway. The rider, one of the men from the bar, climbed off. Thin, wearing a worn leather jacket that didn't quite fit, it was Bill. Bill removed his helmet and hesitated, then approached slowly, like someone unsure if they'd be welcomed or turned away. You're Terrence, right? He asked, voice tentative. Terrence nodded silently. Bill rubbed the back of his neck. I just wanted to stop by and say I'm sorry. About what happened the other night. Terrence raised an eyebrow, skeptical, but curious. You were part of it, he said. I know, Bill replied, his face coloring with guilt. I didn't stop it. Hank, he gets people worked up. I followed along, but it was wrong. I've been thinking about it ever since. Terrence studied him, trying to gauge if this was sincere. Why come now? He asked. Bill shrugged and looked down at his boots. Because it's the right thing, and because, well, watching how you handled it, it made me realize how wrong we were. You didn't deserve any of that. There was a long pause. Then Terrence sighed and leaned back against the truck, arms crossed. What do you want from me? Bill met his eyes. Forgiveness. Maybe, but more than that. I just want to do better. I've seen a lot of hate in my life. I don't want to be part of it anymore. I need to own what I did. Terrence's expression softened. He'd heard plenty of apologies before, some hollow, some heartfelt. This one felt genuine, not because of what Bill said, but because he'd shown up at all. I appreciate you coming here, Terrence said. "It doesn't undo what happened. But it's a start." Bill exhaled, visibly relieved. "Thanks, man. I mean that." He climbed back onto his motorcycle and started the engine. Terrence watched him leave, a swirl of emotions in his chest. The incident had been an ugly reminder of the prejudice he still faced. But Bill's visit offered a rare flicker of hope, a small sign that maybe people could change. He turned back to his truck, wiping his hands as the cicadas buzzed faintly in the background. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Terrence felt more resolved than ever to keep carrying himself with strength and dignity no matter who doubted him. Because not all battles were fought overseas. Some took place in homes, in bars, and in hearts, and those battles in his eyes mattered just as much.